AJ and Baldy for another installment of Random Ramblings of Wrestling. Only this week we talk about the worst of the 90s. This week we asked the panel, what was the worst gimmick of the 1990s? An era that had the WWE show it all, from clowns to mounties to dentists to even sexual chocolate. But first, as per usual, we asked the panel this week's check-in question. What was the worst finisher of the 1990s or of that time frame? I'll start as per usual. I don't want to waste too much time. I'm going to glance over that super boring, super bland, super overrated leg drop that seemed to finish the likes of Andre and Savage and Slaughter. It was atrocious, absolutely atrocious. But for me, I'm going to go for someone different, probably even worse than the leg drop, which is hard for me to stomach and admit. But I'm going to go with the Goons body check into the apron that took place outside the ring and made it one of the worst because he could only win with a count out. And it could almost double as my worst gimmick as well, but this was such a stupid finisher. And it was such a poor body check. It wasn't like a clothesline from hell. It wasn't Bradshaw style. It was just a bump into the side of the apron, and then he'd go into the middle of the ring and just wait for the count out. Yeah. Baldy, how about you?
I'll go to, yeah, for me, the worst one is this was actually made famous initially in in the late 1980s by The Undertaker, aka Mark Callis, and then soon Crush had it for a little bit in the mid 90s. It is the Heart Punch. Now, you look at wrestlers and you know how many punches and whatnot they throw during a match. So the fact that a punch to the heart is a finisher move and it apparently is supposed to knock out the opponent is one of the worst for me, because the amount of punches that are thrown, but it's just the fact that a punch to the heart is a finisher move. Now that I find to be ridiculous and probably one of the worst finishing moves of all time.
What
For a
about the
second,
Big Show's punch, though?
Yeah, but
yeah, I was just about to ask that one.
that's at least a punch to the face, and it's Big Show, so it looks like there's actually some prowess behind a knockout. But come on, Crush, a punch to the heart.
I didn't mind the Big Show punch. Much like you said, it actually sold very well because this guy
Yeah,
was huge. So you could believe
Yeah,
that he wound up for his finisher and
with
knocked a guy
yeah
out.
with him it worked. With Crush, Crush's cranium crunch was that fit
that was
Crush,
a good
but
one. That was a good one.
the
Dude, I
heart
like that
punch.
one.
Yeah, I
I
was gonna
love the
say
cranium
the
crunch.
cranium crunch was good, but the heart punch, no, not so much. That was heel Crush, and they thought that was a good finishing move.
Would
So
you say the heart punch was worse than the Great Khali chop to the head?
no.
So Great Khali
Well,
is actually worse. I mean, it
well, I
doesn't
mean,
fit in the time frame anyways, but I just want to
So I
know
think,
because that was a
yeah, so I
pretty
think
bad finisher.
I agree, but I think that's kind of in the same vein as the Big Show's punch, because I think you have such a menacing looking figure that I think like a chop or like a punch to the face, while it looks like a pretty routine move, can be sold just based off of the person's figure. Same thing with like Mark Henry's like body slam, right? Like that was like one of my contenders is like he's just picking up someone, just slamming him down. It's a very basic wrestling move, but given the fact that he's like 300 pounds or whatever he is, right? Like just his physique kind of sells it similar to the Big Show's punch, I think.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, Kali's arm looks like, it's like a tree trunk. So even,
Yeah,
if he comes in slow motion, like it looks like, hey, that's gonna do some damage. Whereas, Crush, don't get me wrong, the guy was a big guy, but it just didn't suit him.
yeah. So for me, I think so. When I was thinking about this question, I was kind of going through the like Big Show with the punch and Mark Henry the slam, and both of those just based off the figures and like how menacing they looked. I was like, you know what, like yeah, like it's a finish that you can sell. For me, it was basically down to two. One was the worm, and surprisingly, I know like it was a pretty popular move, but the fact that you have this scrawny little guy doing like a 10-minute long dance and he comes down with a chop, like there's no way this scrawny guy is gonna knock someone out with a chop and get a 3 count. But for me, the worst finisher went to Umaga with his Samoan spike, kind of similar to Baldy with the punch to the heart. It was basically a thumb to the throat. Um, while it could be uncomfortable and I could see someone like rolling around in pain, you're not going to knock someone out to be able to get a 3 count. So for me, it was the Samoan spike.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
You know, I kind of like both moves. I'm not gonna lie. I liked the Scotty Too Hottie worm. I thought it sold
No,
really
no,
well. Anytime
his
he did it, the fans got super into it.
his dance was great, but the fact that he came down with just a chop,
Which was, well, I mean, what else was he gonna do? He couldn't do a backflip. He wasn't that acrobatic.
but like he was like 120 pounds, and his chop was supposed to sell the finisher of a match and like
But I think
get
that's
him a
what made them. I mean, these guys, they weren't like tag champs. They weren't like renowned,
for
athletes and
sure, for
everything.
sure.
For their role, I felt like that shot was perfect. And then they'd finish off with a dance, and he'd be all like super excited. I thought
Yeah,
Brian Christopher was kind of blah, and Scotty was more of my favorite, probably because
yeah.
of the worm. But I actually liked Umaga's little thumb thingy. What is it called again? The Umaga
The
what?
Samoan Spike.
Samoan
The
Spike.
Samoan spike. I didn't mind it. I know he used to tape up his thumb. They sold it really well. I mean, the idea of sticking a thumb in someone's throat as a finisher seems kind of ridiculous, but I didn't mind it too much. I thought it
No,
was something different.
yeah, I don't know. It just didn't do it for me.
I
So
would still
as
take
TJ,
the I would still take the thumb over the leg drop.
oh, 1,000%. The leg drop was probably one of the worst finishers.
Yet it was the most over move.
I'm surprised, Baldy, that you
Baldy,
didn't mention.
you can admit it was it was a horrible finisher.
It worked perfectly for the character.
I
You
thought
kind
I
of
was surprised,
paused, so it
Baldy,
seemed
that
like you
you.
were about to admit it there.
It's the perfect finisher for the character.
Yeah, I was surprised, Baldy, that you never came back at TJ with Warriors finisher, the big
I know what
splash.
that I thought about that.
That's what I thought you were gonna go with.
I thought about going there, but I was like, you know what? The heart punch just I hate that move. So I stayed away from the splash.
Yeah, I would have given you a little bit of leeway on the Warrior finisher, but I liked it still. I mean, it was kind of interesting to see him pick up all these big dudes and splash them, but yeah, still
But
not
he
still
just
better. Anything's
yeah
better than leg drop.
yeah. It put Andre down in his first ever loss in front of 93,000 people. So that's all that matters.
Okay,
Probably the
so
body slam more than the leg drop, but
Moving on now.
as TJ had kind of discussed at the start of the episode, we'll be discussing the worst gimmick from I guess 90s onwards. There were a lot of different gimmicks. I mean, as TJ said, there was a cop, there was a chief, there was a dead guy. There were just so many different gimmicks that WWE, WCW kind of unrolled and kind of gave to us on a weekly basis and some worked, some didn't. So I think the point of this is to just kind of highlight ones that we felt really didn't and kind of drop the ball. So maybe Baldy, I'll start with you first. What was, in your opinion, one of the worst gimmicks?
Jesus, I was debating between the series of Mortal Kombat characters that WCW had with Mortis and Glacier and Wrath, but even worse than that was Mantar of what WWE had. I felt like he was, basically it was someone that I don't even know how to really describe him. It looked like, somebody that was like a wild animal, and all he would frequently do is headbutt, maul, and even moo at his opponents. And it was like, how are you gonna try and get this guy over? Just, he dressed in like he's like a bull, and then he would take it off. He would take off his attire, and just it was a terrible gimmick all together put together all together. I mean, if you look at, WWE had some bad gimmicks. Like, I don't know who came up with this idea. Like, Bruce Pritchard refers to as the box of gimmicks, where, they pull one out randomly and say, hey, you're going to be this guy. Like, I feel like Mantar was probably one of the worst, but
How long of a run did he have?
he was
It was
around
pretty short,
it was
wasn't it?
very short. Like, he debuted, I think, in around Royal Rumble 95, and by the King of the Ring tournament he was gone. Like, I'm
Yeah,
surprised he even lasted 6 months.
he was one that it didn't really register with me.
No.
There's a lot of them that I remember, but his run was one that I definitely just missed.
Yeah, I mean, as bad as everyone likes to criticize WWE for bad gimmicks, the early 90s WCW had some really bad ones. Like, RoboCop showed up there, on
What
one
about
episode.
Yeti?
Yeah, the Yeti's
I was
one.
just about to bring up the Yeti right now.
Kevin Nash is Oz. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that photo. Kevin Nash is Oz. Like, there's some pretty bad
No.
ones. WCW also had something called Arachnaman. And then once they were sued by Marvel Comics, that one didn't last very long either. So they basically had Spider-Man, but with yellow and purple.
But the thing that really surprised me with the Yeti was that they actually to WWE's point, like anytime they would bring in like a gimmick like Mantar and stuff, it would basically serve like a mid card. But Yeti, they brought him out into like a main card draw where he came in with like Hogan and like the Giant and that whole feud.
Oh my God.
Um,
I don't know if you've ever seen that clip of where they try to give Hogan
the bear
a
hug.
double bear hug. Oh my goodness.
And then he like came back during Warzone as like the Super Ninja Yeti or something like that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they had
Um,
some really bad ideas
that
there.
one was just I don't know what they were thinking with like in terms of bringing him out, A as a mummy, but B as someone that was like trying to interfere in like a main card draw.
It
Well,
wasn't
they
even just a mummy. It was a poorly packaged mummy. It was like the stuff that you see, like a costume that you got from Value Village or something.
Yeah.
And someone just threw it up together, and they're just like, "Yo, man, just go out there. We just need you to bear hug a guy, and that's it. Just that's
well
all we need you to
the
do."
thinking behind that was because he did debut at Halloween Havoc. They thought, all right, hey, it's the theme of Halloween Havoc, so let's bring in the Yeti. I'm also surprised no one has brought up one of our favorite entrances and debuts of all time with the Shockmaster. I
Oh
was
yeah. I mean,
waiting for someone to bring that up.
that was legendary.
You know, the
Like,
thing with the Shockmaster, and I know he goes down in history as like the worst debut, the funniest debut, also a really poor gimmick, but it's almost like what's that word? Not pop culture, but like I guess pop culture icon in a sense, where you look back on the Shockmaster and you don't even think of him as the worst, you just think it's hilarious. And you almost have like a
yeah,
soft spot now for the Shockmaster.
yeah.
I mean,
I
he was
mean,
part of like the Edge and Christian show that they had going on. They brought him in. Like, it's just something to laugh about. It's not something to actually like criticize anymore.
But what's funny is his career could have taken a completely different turn. A couple years prior, he was actually projected to face Hogan at WrestleMania 7. That was initially in the books. He was going to turn heel and join the Iron Sheik, and it was going to be Sheik Tugboat as a heel facing Hogan at WrestleMania 7. But then they decided to change that up and go with Sergeant Slaughter, which was the right call. But had they gone with that, maybe the Shockmaster doesn't happen.
I guess he wasn't as menacing as they would have liked when he tumbled through and lost his helmet along the way. I mean, you lose your credibility instantly.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That video alone though was just classic, especially when you have like Ric Flair, Cole Anderson, Davey Boy Smith just like laughing while like Booker T and Stevie Ray were just cursing. Oh, that was classic.
Booker T would have some legendary moments with cursing on television. So
But you do bring up a
Okay,
good point of the fact that people overlook sometimes the really goofy gimmicks that WCW had
oh my God,
because you focus so much on WWE. Like
yeah, like
Oz is one of them. Oz looks so stupid.
Oz was really bad.
Literally came out in this like super old guy beard and this like emperor sort of like gown and headdress, and when he takes it off, he really had nothing else going on. I think he was managed by what, Kevin Sullivan too.
I think so. Early on.
Yeah, that was a really bad one. And we thought Diesel was bad, but that makes Diesel look amazing.
what did you guys think about Disco Inferno? Like anytime you think of wrestling, you don't think of disco dancing, but like I think Disco Inferno, while some might say was one of the worst gimmicks, but he had a run.
He got over.
So what did you guys make of his gimmick?
He was someone that he made it work. Like, some guys, they were given shitty gimmicks and, there wasn't much they could do with them. But I gotta say, I wasn't a fan of it, but he made it work. He got over, like, he was a television champion. Eventually, he worked himself into an angle where, when almost everyone in WCW joined the NWO, he was one of them. And, he kind of had a brief sort of run there. So I think he did the best that he could with it.
I thought he got over really well. I didn't mind him. The fans got really behind him. He had a great look to him. He sold his gimmick really well. And for his sort of like mid card status, I felt like he rocked his role really well.
Yep.
And a guy who literally
Yeah.
got nothing, and made something out of it, and got a fan base out following out of it too, which is pretty huge.
Yeah, like, very odd. Every so often you'd see the odd fan kind of imitating his dance. I don't know if his imitation was flattery or just trying to insult him, but regardless, he got the fans' attentions when his music hit.
It's eerily similar to the modern day when they had Emma and Fandango, and they
Yeah,
would come out and they do like this goofy dance, but the fans
yeah,
just start eating it up.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree, but I think between the two companies, I think WWE definitely had more of the worst gimmicks. I think they definitely just reached way more than WCW. And I think one of the prime examples of that is 1990 Survivor Series. Baldy, I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about here.
The
The
gobbledygooker?
mysterious egg that was on display.
Yeah,
And
that is the gobbledygooker. Well, initially,
so,
if
well,
you
yeah,
see,
so like, what was the whole storyline behind that? Like, what were they going for? Like
so
we all know what happened, but what were they going for in that?
well, that's the thing. They wanted it to be like this massive debut, and like if you've seen the Undertaker's last ride, any of his episodes, he talks about how he thought he was going to be the gobbledygooker. That when he came over, when they didn't really know what they had, that his fear was when he got that call from Vince that it was going to be you're going to be the gobbledygooker pal, but he
Yeah.
ended up getting the Undertaker gimmick.
But like, what was their hope with that gimmick?
I don't know if it was supposed to be a one-off or if there was a long-term pitch. Like Survivor Series always takes place around Thanksgiving, so they thought, hey, let's have a turkey or a chicken or whatever hatch out of an egg, and it's going to get over. But it
No, because like they were trying to really sell the gobbledygooker because like Mean Gene, like Monsoon, Piper, they were all trying to like hype it up.
well, that's what the
Um,
intention was, right? And then I don't know if they knew how bad it was going to turn out once they did debut, but that one,
I think they almost benefited a little bit because they did this like whole like you leave the egg out there for a long period of time, you build a
yeah,
bit of the hype, and you have the unveiling at Survivor Series. But they benefited because this thing was so stupid, they could have just left it as like a one night only
yeah.
at Survivor Series kind of thing. And with the reaction being so bad, and people were like, "What the hell is going on here?"
mm,
And
I
they
mean,
realized, hey, we can just abandon it right here, right now. It was just for Survivor Series, just for Thanksgiving, and we're done with
yeah.
it.
I mean, luckily for them, there was another debut that sort of overshadowed the gobbledygooker, which, when you think back to Survivor Series 1990, it's known for something else and not the debut of the gobbledygooker.
Yeah, how things would be different if that was the Undertaker who got the call to come out of
Yeah,
that egg, though,
the
huh?
gobbledygooker, mean Mark Callis.
yeah, that's crazy. And then sticking with WWE, I mean, well, this one's for you. The time that Hogan was forced to sit out for the remainder of his contract, so he debuted as Mr. America. Now, as a clear like Hogan fan, what did you make of this gimmick?
For the record, I just wanted to know that Baldy was one of those idiotic fans who would sit there and be like, "That's not Hulk Hogan. That's Mr. America. He
He
just
even
told you
passed
it's
the
not Hulk
lie
Hogan."
detector.
Hey, he did pass the lie detector test, so, especially in the wrestling business, lie detector tests are never incorrect. That was a terrible way of trying to keep Hogan on screen when supposedly, his contract was valid and, he should have been fired. But yeah, that one wasn't a very good idea. But it's one of those things where, you can put a mask and you can put a mask on anybody and, suddenly they become somebody different. But yeah,
Well,
that one
when the
was
mask shows his handlebar mustache, like, like at least
Not to
cover it
mention the
up.
poses. Not like at least change up something about yourself.
And his
This guy's
music.
going in the middle of the
hey,
ring and he's like still posing like Hulk Hogan and then coming out saying, "I'm not Hulk Hogan." Come
He
on,
came out with his
man.
music.
Baldy,
hey,
what do you say to that?
some fans still bought it.
So,
Some fans
Baldy,
like Baldy.
like, I don't know if you know about this, but do you know whose idea that was? The whole Mr. America um gimmick, I guess.
I'm gonna guess it probably wasn't Vince's idea.
It wasn't?
I don't know. I mean, who knows? Back then, that was around the time where anything the writers pitched to be like, "Hey, let's go with this, pal," and they'd end up running with it. Like, I don't know. It could
Yeah,
have been a Vince idea, but it could have also just as been, Brian Gerwitz or Kevin Dunn or Bruce Pritchard. Could have been any one of their ideas where it's like, "Hey, let's put Hulk Hogan in a mask. No one's gonna know,
I guess.
and let's
TJ,
call him Mr. America."
TJ, did you have any like worst gimmicks that you thought were particularly bad that we haven't touched on yet?
Um, like I look back at a lot of, and I know I have a bias here for WWE because I was such a huge
Yeah.
supporter and a big fan growing up. So a lot of the gimmicks that get a bad rep, I actually enjoyed more or less. I didn't mind Isaac Yankem DDS, the whole crazy dentist before he became King thing.
Yeah.
I thought they sold it really well. They ran with it for about a year or so. But he was pretty intimidating. You know, he's a
Yeah.
big dude with some really gnarly teeth and just looked hideous to look at. So you could tell there's a little bit of like craziness to him.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Nails. I know Nails kind of fell off the radar and he was like doing his own thing and left really quickly, but I kind of bought into that gimmick of like the crazy guy out of prison stuff.
Well, you
Yeah.
heard,
And then,
have you looked into the backstory of what happened with Nails?
oh yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Like that's what I mean. Like he fell off the radar a little bit because like there's a reason he didn't stick around for too long.
Yeah.
And then there was
Mm-hmm.
like another guy who gets a lot of bad rap was Repo Man, and I loved Repo Man. I thought Repo Man was hilarious. I thought his promos were super funny. I thought he was super into the character, and I
He
thoroughly
did
enjoyed
have
him.
some feuds as well.
It was
Yeah,
a
I
full.
enjoyed him.
I mean, that was quite the turnaround. Like he was a full 360 to go from Smash of Demolition to the Repo
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I mean it was it was a little much. But then another one was like Boogeyman. I like Boogeyman. I know he's a little out there. They used him sporadically. Maybe that's why I didn't mind him. It wasn't like a heavy set character that took over the storylines. He would just come in here and there.
I'm surprised we haven't mentioned AJ's favorite wrestler, Gangrel, who showed up on AEW this past weekend.
Oh, he was. I didn't even know
Yeah.
he was on AEW.
Yeah, he randomly just showed up at Matt Hardy's house when they were having that match.
I did not know that. I gotta start following AEW again, maybe. Being that we're big Gangrel fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Gangrel, like I don't know, like he had a pretty sick music, but everything else about his character was just, I don't know. There's only so much that you can do with a character like that. I think the Boogeyman teacher, to your point though, I think like again, like that's not a character that's gonna go on a title run. Like
Sure.
he's not gonna be pointing at the like WrestleMania sign, but I think how they used him was smart. Just kind of like here and there, and just
Yeah,
you know,
sporadically, it was perfect.
yeah. So I thought that was a gimmick that actually worked
For
for
sure.
what
That's what I
they
mean.
like kind of used him in with. So yeah, I kind of like that.
He came in every so often, just enough that you wouldn't get sick of him.
Yeah,
But at a point where you're like, okay, I've had enough of you. Go away for about another year.
yeah, exactly.
What are your guys' thoughts on Hornswoggle?
I didn't mind Hornswoggle. I thought they used him pretty well, and he came across in many different storylines. This is also 2000s, not 90s, but
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
But like
just thinking of gimmicks.
he just,
you know
I don't
what?
know, he just didn't really do it for me. Like in terms of like kind of capturing my attention. Like I know to teacher's point, like they did use him in a lot of different angles. But
Hey,
I don't know.
he was also Vince McMahon's bastard son.
He had a lot of great storylines. I actually enjoyed what they did with him. You know, a lot more than
Yeah,
that other guy. I forgot his name.
they made him entertaining.
Even that other
Yeah,
guy.
like,
Oh my god, I'm forgetting his name. The guy with no neck. That
oh,
recently he was with
the one with
Carmella.
Carmella.
Yeah, he was with Carmella, and then he almost botched AJ Styles' finisher. Oh, I forget his name. But he had a solid run there for a while too. But I felt like
Yeah, well,
Hornswoggle was way better utilized than he ever was. But
yeah.
he's got over as well.
Oh, James Ellsworth.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Ellsworth. Forgot about him.
Yeah, he
And
was
there's some
someone. It was sort of a desperate pitch to kind of throw him in the main event picture, but you know.
You want to talk about desperate? There were a lot of good desperate ones. You remember Gilbert?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like that was obviously the
That was
sincerest
like
form
more
of
so.
imitation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was more so just kind of like laughing at what
But it
Dutch
was
did.
great.
Yeah,
I loved it. And they brought him back a couple times over.
Yeah.
And I mean, like he also fit in during the 90s era. Baldy tried jumping ahead to the 2000s.
mm-hmm.
And I think the only reason he wanted to do that was because he wanted to talk about one of his best gimmicks, which was probably the fat chick Thrilla, who was Mike Awesome. So we're not going to go there, Baldy. I know you want to talk about your fandom for the guy, but we're not going to go over to Mike Awesome, okay?
That 70s
But
What
man.
mine,
What
for
did you guys
mine, I'm
think
gonna-
about? It's like, yeah. Go ahead,
Go.
Tej.
I was just going to say for mine, I probably was going to narrow it down to two.
Yeah.
I didn't like 7 over in WCW.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of random, but my
Yeah.
number one pick was probably going to be Max Moon. I thought that was so stupid. The fact that he came with a jetpack. He came with a jetpack and it did nothing. He literally looked like someone where they gave it to a 5-year-old and like, hey, draw us an outfit and we're going to run with it. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's the stupidest gimmick ever.
The mid
And to
90s.
think that guy went to go on to become Conan in WCW.
Yeah. The mid
Oh,
90s
that's
were
right. Yeah, I
the
didn't.
mid 90s were an interesting time for the
I know.
WWE.
It
What did
really,
you
really
guys
was.
think about Giant Gonzalez?
The bodysuit slash costume tells the whole story. He again was someone like Vince McMahon has always been enamored with guys with size. So it's, hey, let's bring a big guy in and let's have him feud with the Undertaker. That seems to
Mm-hmm.
always be the trend, and that was no different. Like Taker's even
Yeah.
says that feud took years off his career.
Yeah.
So that he was someone that he was so limited in WCW. I don't know why they thought that, hey, it's like we bring him into the WWF, we put him in a giant monkey suit, that he's gonna get over.
I've hated the gimmick. I've been very passionate and vocal about how much I hated the Giant Gonzalez gimmick, and again how he was pushed to the Undertaker and stuff. But I've scaled back my criticisms once I read about like what happened to him post wrestling and his quick demise and like the
Yeah.
dialysis and diabetes, and I felt really bad. So I don't want to shit on him too much, but I mean that character was really, really bad for the
He,
WWE at the time, and it made no sense.
I mean, good on
No
him. He
sense
he probably made a good chunk of money feuding with the Undertaker, but yeah, like it didn't do Taker any favors.
for sure. And the more, and not to kind of detour on this, but sometimes when you talk about these wrestlers, especially from like yesteryear,
Yeah.
and then you look them up, and then you're like, whatever happened to them?
Yeah,
And a
Mhm.
lot of them have very unfortunate endings,
yeah, I know.
sadly.
Yeah,
And he was
No,
one
for
of them.
sure.
So that's why I've always been like super like, man, Giant Gonzalez, this and this. And I read about him, I'm like, I can't. I don't like this
Yeah.
character, and they didn't do much with it, but I just can't.
yeah. No, I
Max
know.
Moon, on the other hand, that guy was atrocious. What a stupid looking costume.
So I think we've kind of like shit on a lot of wrestlers. Maybe now we'll kind of switch gears onto the underrated personality gimmicks that you guys thought that there were in WWE and WCW. Baldy, do you want to go first on this one?
Man, there's so many that come to mind.
Give me one.
Uh, I want
How
to
about-
say.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
I'll start you off with one of them. You know one I
Yeah.
really liked, and it was just literally a joke of a gimmick.
Hmm.
But again, like this kind of speaks to how well of a performer and a wrestler this person is, that anything that they did, they sold,
Yeah.
was Dude Love.
Yeah.
I like Dude Love, and I didn't think I was going to at first because it was super cheesy and he had like these funny gimmicks. I liked it. I thought it was hilarious every time he came on, and again, it was shortened, like it was short lived. And it's not like he's in my like top tier of like excellent
Okay.
wrestlers, but there's
Where
a
would you
character
put
that I know
him?
is a joke that I like.
Where would you put him in the different characters of Mick Foley? Where would you put him? At the bottom, wouldn't you?
Yeah, he definitely be at the
Actually,
bottom.
I liked him more than Mankind.
Interesting.
What?
The man,
Yeah,
I find that to
No,
be
no, come
surprising.
on.
I do. You know what? I didn't. Mankind was kind of mad. He had some great matches. Don't get me wrong. The Boiler Room Brawls, the Hell in the Cells.
His
The character
promos
didn't
were
do
The
so
much for me.
promos,
good.
like the backstory, like his
It
interview with
was
Jim Ross, like that
Him
was
never
pulling
really
out his
sold over on me.
hair.
like
I
Dude,
know.
that
I
was
know. It's sitting in the dark
it
and
was
doing the whole
such a
pallbearer
great
thing.
character, or it was such a good character to put up against the Undertaker.
it
He
was.
was a perfect guy to go
Yeah.
against with.
Perfect.
And like I said, whoever else, which better character to start off the Boiler Room Balls and such a great
Yeah.
feud with Taker with.
So how could
So
you
he was
put
good. I just
that
didn't.
below
I
Dude Love?
personally didn't like his gimmick too much. I think he did great in the ring. I loved his persona and what he was able to pull off. But for the gimmick, I was kind of meh. I wasn't a big Mankind guy. I was a big Mick Foley guy, but I wasn't a big Mankind guy.
I don't know, man. I would have to disagree, but Dude Love was okay. Like I think if he had a slightly longer run, I think it would have been kind of fun to see where he would have taken it. But for me, the run was just too short as Dude Love. And just kind of given his other characters, they were just so hard and edgy. To see him as like a fun-loving guy, it was for me personally. It was just kind of one that it just didn't hit with me quite as well.
I just love the fact that he was able to be all three in a Royal Rumble one year. I thought that was fantastic
That was
booking.
good. Yeah, that was really good.
They did that so well, and I bet
They
someone
did.
was probably threw it out there in one of those creative meetings as a joke, and they're like, "Yeah, sure," but it turned
Let's
out
go
awesome.
ahead. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, no, that's smart.
For me, one of my favorite gimmicks was probably Mr. Perfect. Like I
Yeah,
look back at the promos and then his promos and just all the the background, all the videos that they shot of him doing all those things, and just him being the great technical wrestler that he was. I thought that gimmick suited him perfectly, just because he fit the bill so well, and he really showed why he was Mr. Perfect. And just I love the towel and the gum toss always in his entrance coming to the ring. So for me, Mr. Perfect is someone that's always been one of my favorite gimmicks. That one, and then the $1 Million Man. That
Yeah.
one, that's definitely probably one of the best gimmicks. And Bruce Pitcher tells a story of how one time on a plane, somebody was smoking around Vince, and Vince offered the guy a ton of cash to stop smoking. And then at that time, Bruce realized the $1 Million Man was literally based on Vince's real life. That's where he got the idea of the character from. That everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man. So $1 Million Man and Mr. Perfect are probably two of the ones that
The
rank for me.
Million
Another
Dollar
thing they
Man.
did really. Sorry,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say another thing they did really well with the $1 Million Man was that it was the day and age where like you were literally living your character.
Yep.
And they
Yeah.
had the $1 Million Man be that $1 Million Man in and out of the ring.
Yep.
Like he was. That's what sold him essentially.
Yeah. No, I thought the $1 Million Man was a great gimmick, but Mr. Perfect. So, would you call that a gimmick? Because, like for example, Bret Hart, right? Like Bret the Hitman Hart, he was supposed to be like a hitman and stuff. And a lot of these gimmicks, like Stone Cold Steve Austin, to me, they just seem like a extension of that wrestler's personality. Granted, like Mr. Perfect or like Kurt Hennig wasn't probably like that in real life, but would you really call that a gimmick, or was that just more so just like a stretch on his personality? Like maybe he was
No,
just like a
I
super
think
confident jock or something like that.
I think it was definitely a gimmick. 'Cause, I mean, if you look at all the videos that they showed, like he may have been a jock, but nobody is really that athletic and good at that many different sports. But with the videos that they shot to kind of build around him,
The
they showed that
80 the
the
80
80
yard
yard catch and cast.
toss
That was
himself.
amazing. That was amazing.
Yeah,
So
no, his was really good though.
yeah, his was really well done. So I don't think it was just personality may have been that way, but I don't think it was based on who he was. I think that gimmick was just perfectly suited for him.
Yeah, I would agree. For me, um, so when you think of like an underrated gimmick, so like I think probably one of the best gimmicks ever, I think we would all agree is probably the Undertaker, just
Yeah,
for his like longevity and just kind of
yeah.
how he sold that character. For me, and I think this wrestler, I think he would probably come up as one of the best gimmicks. So he might not be underrated for a lot of people, but for me, I feel like he doesn't get enough love for how well he sold his character, given how strange it was, and that's Goldust. Like in the time that he kind of came out, it was like the Attitude Era and stuff, and it was just a weird character. Like you just didn't know what to make of it at the start. But the fact that he was able to keep that character for as long as he did, and kind of where he took it in terms of like being able to book like like mid card matches that people would actually want to watch and kind of kept people's attention. So yeah, for me,
Yeah,
I
no,
I think
his
Goldust is an underrated
yeah, oh
gimmick.
no, I definitely agree. Like if you look at he debuted before the Attitude Era. Like he was around in the
Yeah,
mid '90s. He debuted I think in '95. Like it was one of those where WWE had like the strange gimmicks at that time, and then for him to kind of last and make it work, given that some of the things that he did were not so PG-13,
yeah.
but WWE was still kind of in that new generation era, and the fact that he made that character work for so many years. Yeah, I think you're right. He doesn't get enough credit for making that character work. Like at that time, I don't know if that was for them to kind of bury him by giving him that character, but he ran with it and made it work.
Goldust is
Yeah.
one of those when he first came out, the biggest reason why people would be drawn to him is because he had Marlena.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because he was so eerie and he was so bizarre and he had feuds with like Razor and he had like this tattoo, like his name tattooed on his chest. And then they did the whole like the OJ Simpson thing with like the car chase and all this other stuff. And he was one of those guys who took a while, but because he was there and he always remained there, he slowly crept up on you and you're like, okay, I'm becoming a fan of this guy. He's not someone that you gravitated towards instantly because he was so strange. But I do think he is very underrated for what both his presence, his impact, and his abilities even in the ring.
Hmm.
He put on some solid matches, but you
He did.
forget that because the persona is so outlandish and so there.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
Dustin Rhodes, like if you look back at his early career, even in WWE, like he was able to have some great matches. So it turns out, he had some really good matches. But yeah, the gimmick also he made it work. Like it was one that could have easily, we considered one of the worst gimmicks ever. But you
Yeah,
look
I know.
back and it worked.
I liked him too. I think another one that I know a lot of people probably didn't like, but a guy who he stuck around for a while. He came back quite a bit every so often, every few years, and kept his same persona in the indies when he transitioned out of WWE was Doink the Clown.
Mm.
And you
Well,
initially think about it, you're like, dude, he's a clown. Like, how far are you going to be able to go with this gimmick?
well, with Doink, WWE actually used a couple different players. That's why it was able to make it work on the indies and come back. It was actually like when they brought in the double doink, that was when they actually transitioned and had two different sort of doinks. So that one, it wasn't just like it was
Uh,
another good gimmick, but it was two different characters that ended up playing them. One of the guys who ended up playing the second doink was actually the guy who played Skinner.
Yeah, well, because the first
Yeah,
guy was Osborne or something, right?
yeah,
Something Osborne.
yeah.
Yeah, Skinner was one of those pretty stupid gimmicks too. I didn't like, but yeah, Doink's one of those guys. Like you think about it, it's a clown. And
Yeah.
granted,
yeah.
they might have had a few like people changes along the way, but the gimmick itself, it survived and it had some pretty notable feuds too.
Yeah,
For what again, like a clown, you would have dismissed that.
yeah. I
Especially
mean,
those little Doinks. So it was so much fun at Survivor
yeah.
Series.
And then
Yeah.
like I mean, the key was that they made it work because he was a baby face, and then they transitioned him into a heel. So I think
Yeah,
that also made it work. Like had they kept him a babyface, I don't think he would have had as good of a run. But the fact that he ended up transitioning to a heel, it sort of worked.
and even with that character, you have quite a bit of versatility to pull off both babyface and heel so
Yeah,
well with the clown. He's either super funny and super humorous, or he's really dark and really scary. And he had some
Yeah.
pretty solid feuds too. I think he feuded with like Bam Bam one
yeah, he
time
did.
around
He
Yeah,
Mania.
did. Yeah.
And Bam Bam's another guy I think is super underrated for what he was able to do. A big man with his sheer size, and a lot
great
has been
worker.
said about how he feuded with the Click and they kind of pushed him out.
Yeah, he had
But
some. He
another
had
guy
some.
who doesn't get a lot of credit, man.
Yeah,
He put on some phenomenal matches, and for his athleticism, for his
So
size,
good. Yeah.
yeah,
he was great. And like you Baldy
Yeah.
just mentioned, like he had a great work ethic.
yeah. Like you look
He had a lot of
back at some
demons.
of his matches with Bret Hart. Like it was some really, really, really good matches that he had with Bret Hart.
Is he still alive?
No, he also passed away.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of sad when you start going through the list
Yeah,
and you
man.
realize how many of these wrestlers are no longer around.
yeah.
Yeah,
Another
that
one
goes for. Oh, another one.
that
Let's
kind
hear
of
it.
so this guy actually had two really great gimmicks, and he really kind of sold both of them. One in the '90s, one in the 2000s. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about yet, but Papa Shango and the Godfather.
Yeah. What about
Hey
Again,
Kama
man,
the
don't
what
forget
two.
about
about
Kama Mustafa,
what
the
about yeah,
fighting machine.
yeah,
Okay.
Kama the Supreme Fighting Machine. How can you forget that?
Yeah, how do you forget that? Show some
Yeah,
That
respect
one
to
come on.
sucked.
Kama. Kama was
But
amazing.
the fact that like Papa Shango, like what a random ass like gimmick or like character that like if Vince comes up to you like okay you gotta be like this like voodoo man from like the Amazon like what the hell are you supposed to do with this, right? Like but the fact that he ran with it and he had his like legendary run with the Warrior,
Yeah.
made him throw up,
No,
and then yeah, go ahead, Willie.
that's what made it work. You put him with one of the mainstream guys. Like that's what made it work. Like had they kind of kept him mid card, I don't think it would have worked as well. But the fact that he got that notoriety of working with the Warrior, despite the match being just a complete mess, but the build up
Yeah,
and the promos and the lead up to it was very well done.
I was a big fan of the Papa Shango character. I know another character that a lot of people like
you
to shit on.
were.
I enjoyed him.
Yeah.
I really, really liked him. I liked his whole look. I liked the way he came to the ring. I liked his props. He did really well.
Who did
He
you
did really
like
well as
more,
Kama too.
him or the Godfather?
Two totally different things. The Godfather, obviously, for that time period was
Yeah.
like everybody was on board the whole train. Like, let's not even
Yeah.
pretend. So the Godfather, while looking back on it now in a very PC culture that we live on, and be like, pimp, I can't believe this. Hose, ugh.
Yeah.
For the Attitude Era, it was great. It was a lot
Yeah.
of fun. And he made it work with so many different, like, he could have honestly worked with so many different characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, Val Venus was another one that, worked a character that worked perfectly for the Attitude Era. In any other era, in any other time, that would not have gone over so well. But the Attitude Era, it fit perfectly, and the fans got behind him.
Yeah, and I loved his little intro too. That was great, man. The whole "Hello, ladies," and you bring someone out. It was almost reminiscent of like a Ravishing type of intro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why
Just
it
with
worked.
like
And again, instantly,
bit
like
more
the
edge.
ladies were all over him. Some of the guys were all over him. I'm sure Baldy was really excited every time Val Venus would take his towel off. But he was a character that worked.
Yeah. Baldy, did you have any more?
I mean, I was just trying to think back of not the best, but some really bad ones that also, another ones came to mind. I feel like, you don't want to speak, of
But you're
the
going
dead.
to?
I'm going to anyways, but I feel like Men on a Mission was another pretty bad one. Or how
No, man. Men
Mabel.
on a Mission got me hyped every time they came to the ring. I was swinging my hands from left to the right.
Yeah, you must have loved it when King Mabel won the King of the Ring, was
Never
moved
was a
into
King Mabel
WWE.
kind of guy. I'm surprised he got the push that he did. But Men on a Mission
Yeah.
for hype man. And I know what AJ's already going to allude to next when that guy got the elbow drop and he was like having a seizure in the ring. And he oversold the moves so much. He made Dolph Ziggler look tamed.
And another one for me that's really bad is, I'm surprised this one didn't come to me before, is the Red Rooster. I don't know what the hell was the point of that gimmick, but Terry Taylor was just cursed in the WWF as that. Like, just the fact that, he had the little red mohawk, and just, the fact that you would be called the Red Rooster. It was just, that one was another pretty bad gimmick that never really went anywhere.
So, like, who would you put that on? Like, do you put that on the wrestler? Or do you put that on the promoter?
I put that on both. Like, I don't think Terry Taylor did anything to make it work, but like, what are you supposed to do when you tell a guy, hey, you're gonna have a red mohawk and red tights, and we're gonna call you the Red Rooster?
But
Didn't
like, what do
Terry
you do when
Taylor
you
try to
like?
go around and be like, hey man, don't call me Terry Taylor anymore. I'm the Red Rooster. That's how much he wanted to be like part of the character. He might have been a made up story, but I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised the fact that he tried to, obviously, like you said, at that time they were the characters in and out of the ring. So I think at that time maybe he did try his best to try and be the Red Rooster all the time, but just
Yeah.
How
Also
the
a
hell
distinguished
do you beat
wrestler
a
when he
Red
came
Rooster?
in.
yeah, he was a great worker, but I think it took away the character, took away from his work ethic. That's why he didn't have a very long run.
Yeah, like I was kind of thinking about that. Like, do you put that more so on the wrestler or do you put that on the promoter? Like, when someone went to Osborne, I was like, "You're gonna be a clown, right? Like, run with it," and he did,
He did.
right? And there's like so many like Papa Shango, Disco Inferno, like all these random gimmicks that most people be like, no, this doesn't really fit me, but they ran with it, and like maybe it's also due to like their booking and like how they're booked and whether they're up against like a top performer like the Ultimate Warrior, or they get good like mid-card matches like Disco Inferno did. But like, I don't know, like I feel like a lot of these gimmicks, while they can be random at times, I feel like could work if if pushed the right way, or just if the wrestler really kind of like not really goes into character but just sells it a little bit more. I don't
Well,
know.
that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like, a booker's a booker. There's going to be good ideas, there's going to be bad ideas, but ultimately it comes down to the wrestler playing them. Like, if they can make it work, if they can sell the character, and if the fans buy it, whether it's good or bad, as long as the fans buy it and they get the push, then yeah, the character's going to get over. So in some cases, yeah, guys made it work. You look at,
And
like
not
you
only
said,
that, but
Goldust,
sometimes
Pop Jungle.
the fans also drive a lot of times who gets pushed and who doesn't get pushed.
Yeah.
You see it all the time where fans go behind a certain character and the WWE system tries to hold them down. We saw it all the time with Rusev. We saw it all the time with Daniel Bryan nowadays, but the fans keep pushing them and pushing them. Whereas back then,
That's why TJ's favorite gimmick of the Goon, the body check, just didn't sell and it didn't work, so the Goon never got over.
I just don't understand why they pick a hockey player. Like, the sport of hockey isn't exactly over in the U.S. The U.S. is your primary market, and you're bringing a hockey player of all things to make him look like
I
the ultimate
believe he
badass.
had on a blank New Jersey Devils jersey to try and make things work.
Wasn't his
Didn't he
also the big sell
didn't
was
he
that
come
he
out
was
on
too
Pete?
dangerous for the NHL?
Something like that. Yeah, it's basically, hey, it became a movie years later.
Oh God.
But
I
so
remember some
TJ,
of his promos. He was like skating around. He's like too dangerous for the big league. So here
Yeah,
he is in the WWE.
but didn't he come out on like foam skates?
yeah, they made it.
Yeah.
They tried to make it as real as possible.
I
Yeah.
mean, they sold him pretty well. Like Duke the Dumpster Droese used to come out with a trash can and everything.
Hey, and the fans cheered for him.
They did.
Yeah.
Solid blue collar worker. He's one of us.
But so TJ, to your point though about like certain gimmicks not really getting the push that they did back in the '90s to really kind of like bring them up, like Rusev, like he had mentioned. So I'm gonna pose this question to, I guess maybe the three of us, but I'll start with you, TJ, first. Is there a wrestler that if you could go back in time in the '90s or whenever, if you could change how they were booked, that you saw like star potential, where they might have been like a mid Carter or even like a bottom Carter, but if they were booked the right way, that they could have been a like main eventer possibly.
The two biggest ones that stand out for me and who forever stayed in the mid card status are Razor and Ravishing. Two phenomenal
Yeah,
in ring talents, great promos, great character. Fans got behind them, but for whatever reason, they weren't pushed to the heavyweight championship tier.
See, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. Those are great gimmicks, but
They are great gimmicks.
they are great gimmicks. But the thing is, it's some guys just don't need the titles. I feel like their gimmicks were so good and so over. They were guys that were in the title picture, but they were guys that were kind of multiple time intercontinental champions, and that kind of brought them up to the main level. They weren't ever WWF champions, but I feel like they were two guys that didn't need the title. Both great in-ring workers, both could have both great promos, and just the promo videos were amazing, and they could talk on the mic. But they were two guys I think that didn't need the titles.
They might not have needed the titles, but they could have done so much more with the title. The fact that they never got a shot at the title, the fact that there never were any big time feuds in that sort of stage, that to
Mm,
me is a
yeah,
missed opportunity. And to always say, don't get me wrong, Razor was great. First 3-time champion, ladder matches, everything. But imagine what he could have done with the big wigs up there.
well,
yeah,
I think I mean, Razor did have a marquee WWF title match with Bret Hart at Royal Rumble, but it was early on in his run. I agree. Later on, he should have been in the picture. Rick Rude, had the steel cage match with the Warrior at SummerSlam, so they were given the opportunities. But I feel like Rude's title shot was at a good point. He had beaten the Warrior at WrestleMania WrestleMania 5 for the Intercontinental title, and when Warrior won the WWF title, it was, hey, Rude beat him once, Rude can beat him again. So his match, his push was a good one. He was one that they probably could have pushed him with Hogan too, and they could have had a good feud. So Rude probably could have been around longer. With Razor, I feel like early on in his career, like he debuted in early '92, and beginning of '93, he's in a WWF title run. So I feel like it was early on in his character where he got the big push, and then kind of like you said, multiple time Intercontinental champion, ladder matches. Like I feel like they could have done more with him in the latter
That's
part
what
of
I'm
his run.
saying. They
Yeah,
could have done more, but they didn't.
yeah,
So they kept him in a certain box. Granted, he might have, like shot up from the get go. But once he had proven himself, once he had like again harnessed his skill set and everything else, he still stayed in mid card.
yeah,
And he could have done so much more. And I get your point about, hey, some guys don't need the titles, but imagine if they did have the titles.
yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like even going before Razor, like there were certain guys and gimmicks that WWF felt they didn't need titles. Piper was another one. Jake Roberts was another one. Like I feel like Razor kind of falls into that category where despite being multiple Intercontinental champion, like yeah, I said that was kind of the big reason why he left. At the end, the the main event guys, the Bret Harts, the Shawn
For
Michaels, the
sure. But
Undertakers
if you
were
think
making
about
so
like
much more money.
Razor, but if you think about Razor and HBK and how they were like coming up at the same-ish time,
Yeah,
Razor had a lot of feuds with HBK during that sort of intercontinental
yeah,
runs that they did.
yeah,
And look what HBK did when he went to the heavyweight division.
yeah,
Once he got that shot,
yeah,
you
yeah.
would be like, hey, HBK did great when he stayed in the mid card and everything else, but you just jump up and there's so much more opportunity for growth once you get there and you have all these other feuds.
yeah. I mean, what's crazy is the fact that WCW put the title on everybody, yet Razor was
Hmm.
never even a champion in WCW.
Yeah.
That's a surprising one.
What about you, Baldy?
For me, I
Is
feel
there
like
someone?
I feel like for me, I think Jake Roberts is someone like you said. He had a great
Yeah.
character, great promo, great in-ring,
Very
but it was
true.
his personal demons that kind of stopped his run.
Yeah.
I mean, he was supposed to have a great feud with the Warrior before one of the times he got fired, but he was someone that they debated, kind of having him in a feud with Hogan. But again, the DDT was so over that he was someone that they figured the fans may cheer for him more than Hogan, and at that time, that was impossible. So
Yeah.
he's someone that I felt like, despite being a Hall of Famer, having such a great career, he's someone who I felt like could have taken it to the next tier and really been one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, I like that one. I think he definitely could have been one of the great. And I think we say that with the kind of prefix that like he was really good, and people do give him a lot of credit for being a great wrestler. But again, like when you think of like the top draws, his name usually doesn't get mentioned
No,
in that. And I think he should have been booked in better spots and with more main carders. But like you said, his personal demons
yeah, it was
unfortunately
personal
kind of
demons.
came in the way
Yeah.
with that one. Yeah, but I like that pick as well. So for me, I was gonna go with Razor Ramon. Um,
Mhm.
I think TJ definitely hit the nail on the head on that one. I think his gimmick was one that worked so well for him. But just to be a little bit different, just to kind of get your guys' thoughts on this, and this one's a bit of a stretch, but I'm gonna just throw it out there. What do you guys think of the Honky Tonk Man? It was such a gimmick in the like 80s, early 90s, but do you think if they had booked him slightly better, instead of just being known as like intercontinental champion, that he could have had a world heavyweight run potentially if they kind of booked him just a little bit different?
They could have, but I mean at that time, like it was a time where heels didn't really hold on to titles. Like at that
Yeah,
time, the world title was passed around mostly baby faces, except when Savage turned heel. So I mean, they could have given him a run with Hogan, especially
yeah.
because Hogan was supposedly the one that kind of. There's different stories of what happened that him and Hogan were really good friends, and it turns out that when Ricky Steamboat dropped the Intercontinental title, that Honky Tonk Man was supposedly a last minute addition that Hogan kind of nudged Vince, said, hey, put this guy in there, and it kind of got over. But yeah, I know, I
Mm,
agree. I think if he ended up moving up, like, could have done so much for his character, putting him in a main event spot, but he fit that character so well, and the
yeah,
fans absolutely hated him because he was so bad, but he pretended like he was so good, and it fit
I know.
perfectly. And that's why he had some of the longest intercontinental title reign during that time. And it was perfect. And when he finally lost it, the crowd absolutely loved it because it happened so
Yeah.
fast. So no, I think that's a really good one too.
TJ, any thoughts? If you're still there?
No, I'm still here. I mean, I like it. I mean, I don't have too much to chime in
Fair
on
enough.
this one. As you were kind of like going on those, I was thinking more so about who else I would give like honorable mentions. Kind of got lost in there, and I want to throw out. I already talked about Bam Bam. Bam Bam's up there for me, um, and I'd probably go with Brian Pillman as
Mm,
another
Yeah.
second. And because you were
but
talking about like the Honky Tonk Man, the heels,
yeah,
someone who was like really hated. Brian Pillman's another guy who played the character so well, very ahead of his time for the Attitude Era. But
but
that's
so
where I started thinking as you were talking about Honky Tonk Man, and he is like again the greatest Intercontinental champion of all time for a reason.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about, playing character in and out of the ring. Like that's what Pillman essentially did. Like they say, he booked himself into a shoot and, did wonders for himself with him being the biggest free agent at that time and kind of going everywhere and making himself known and then, getting that big deal with the WWF afterwards.
Yeah, but Honky Tonk Man's an interesting one, and he's another guy who like he survived his character for years and years on
Mm-hmm.
the indie market, and in indie runs for a long period of time. But yeah, very underappreciated, I would say.
Baldy, just before we close up, do you have any last minute like mentions that you want to just kind of throw in there?
No, I think we did a pretty good job of touching base. Like I think the only one maybe we didn't mention that, also had a very long run despite going through a few changes was Kane. I think he's another one that, despite the longevity of his character, the initial few years, sort of the transitions that he went through with the different masks and then, losing the mask and kind of keeping his character going for so many years. Like I think Kane is another one that maybe isn't talked about as one of the greatest gimmicks just because the Undertaker's gimmick was so good. But I feel like Kane should be in that group just because the longevity.
And very underappreciated for a lot of stuff that he did. You mentioned,
Yeah.
the cane, the mask, and all this stuff. But he also was like, was he the fake Razor or the fake Diesel? I think it was the fake Diesel.
He was fake Diesel as well. Yeah.
He was a fake Diesel. And always willing to take it for the team. He was like, again, Isaac Yankem for about a year or 2 years.
He at that time he was just doing anything that he could to get noticed and just to have a job.
Yeah. So he was a guy who would do anything and everything, but he did everything pretty well. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
And there's another reason, like, you survive so long in the business for a reason.
Yeah.
And now he's a mayor, so that's even more props to him.
Yeah.
And for me, just kind of closing out, I think my last honorable mention, and I think this kind of goes without saying, kind of in the same vein as Undertaker, is Sting. Basically going from Surfer Sting to Crow. Sting, I'm trying to think, did he have a different name when he was with the Wolfpack? No, right? He was just
he was still Sting.
Yeah, but yeah, I think Sting is one that you definitely have to kind of mention as probably one of the best. Not mentioning his Joker Sting from TNA, but everything else in between was pretty solid.
Another guy who was like also, I mean, his gimmicks were okay. He sold them really well. He was another guy he had a face you can hate easily, but his in-ring ability was really solid. Was William Regal.
Yeah, I mean the man's man.
Yeah, I mean, like, I actually like that gimmick. I was never a big fan of him, but the more you see him, the more you're like, this guy like holds his own. And I love the fact that he gave the cold shoulder or give a rough match to Goldberg that one time.
Yeah.
So another honorable mention to the man's man, William Regal.
Okay, well, that concludes this episode. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Oh, I think we touched on some good, some bad, and some what ifs.
And the worst, which is Mr. America. We're all agreeing with that, and we've all agreed that the leg drop was like the stupidest finisher ever. So yeah, all in all, a pretty good episode.